Recently, the Russian Federation has carried out one of the most brilliant moves in Ukrainian territory. In this case, we are talking about a series of attacks that ended in a truce, but which have not benefited the Kyiv regime. They haven't benefited at all. Because right now, thanks to Russia's actions on the ground, what the collective West feared the most is happening. Zelensky and his associates don't know where to turn. This is everything they wanted to avoid. Exactly what they're having to face right now. In NATO, they are extremely disappointed. So much money sent for this lousy performance by the Ukrainian government. What is this about? What is the brilliant move? What consequences will this have for the future of the special military operation? Here comes the analysis. War correspondent in Donbass and LiuSivaya, especially for you. Here's where we have the footage of the moment. There they are. It turns out that right now in the city of Kyiv, particularly in the city of Kyiv and on the Kharkov highway. Let me pause for a moment to clarify that, in fact, the cities of Kyiv and Kharkov are, interestingly and symbolically, the ones that have recently been among the most attacked by the Russian Federation, especially in terms of energy infrastructure. But is this? Both events, the ones you are seeing in the images, happen in the city of Kyiv, on the Kharkov road, in a way, bringing both events together. The Ukrainians, visibly angry, are gradually gathering in the streets of Kyiv to protest against the constant cuts in electricity, heating, and water. Mainly, the energy shortages are starting to be noticed in the streets of the Ukrainian capital. That is, people are going out to protest, and not against Vladimir Putin's attacks, but rather, people are protesting against the absolutely disastrous actions of the Kyiv regime. Here, the main point of this war of attrition by the Russian Federation is that, in the end, Russia will keep whatever it wants. We have no chance of winning this conflict, and all we want is to live in peace. We need to have electricity. We need to have water. Stop this absolute massacre once and for all. Do whatever is necessary, but please give us back our good life. This is striking, painful for the Kyiv regime on one hand and on the other, because this is everything Volodymyr Zelensky has been trying to avoid in every possible way. It's everything that puts him face to face with an absolutely shameful reality, and a reality that the collective West simply could not accept, especially in a public and notorious way. Zelensky is not liked among the Ukrainian population. He is being increasingly rejected by the Ukrainian people. Isn't he neglecting the interests of the Ukrainian people by waging an absolutely absurd war that ultimately harms the Ukrainian population? And finally, and above all, this same Ukrainian population is getting increasingly fed up and therefore is becoming more and more united. Also to stand up to those who are making them suffer on such a large and absolutely massive scale. According to information from my sources in particular, right now the Kyiv regime is absolutely furious. They are absolutely lost. They are trying to figure out how to clarify this situation. But above all, and most importantly, one of the most important parts here, the attacks from the Russian Federation are not happening at this moment, which once again highlights the question, where is the Russian Federation's plan? The attacks happened at the moments when it hurt the Kyiv regime the most. They caused a tremendous amount of damage, but above all, this damage was done in a surgical, absolutely controlled manner. The Russian Federation has not even used 50% of all its destructive capacity when attacking Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And right after that, an agreement was reached, which, by the way, is about to end, according to unofficial sources. But anyway, this hasn't been denied by Russia. and the country's actions have kind of gone in the same direction. They have indicated that Russia and Ukraine reached an agreement for about a week of no mutual attacks on critical infrastructure. Ukraine would not attack targets, especially oil related ones, for example. It would not attack oil refineries. It would not attack this shadow fleet of the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, the Russian Federation would not carry out massive attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. That's where Russia made another brilliant move. Because really, the previous attacks were enough for massive demonstrations to start taking place in the streets of Ukraine. In other words, Russia wouldn't have to do absolutely anything about what's happening in Ukraine right now either. There's no need for it to keep attacking because the results are already visible in the streets and because the results are exactly the most undesirable ones for the government of Volodymyr Zelensky, for the Kyiv regime. In other words, while Ukraine does not attack Russian refineries, while it does not attack Russian ships, Russia has already caused these consequences within Ukrainian society. And I'll go further. What has been agreed upon is not to attack energy infrastructure, but not the logistical infrastructure. So now Russia is finishing off these attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure with very, very precise attacks against the logistical infrastructure as well. So, in addition to power outages and heating cuts, there are also problems with public transportation, especially issues with the railways. This is, of course, related to troop movements and the movement of Western weapons to the front, but it also inevitably ends up affecting ordinary people. They are experiencing this in an increasingly desperate way, getting angrier and angrier, little by little. If things continue like this, seeing that people are already starting to take to the streets, the result will end up being even worse for the Kyiv regime because to these requests, our public demands, another one of absolutely fundamental importance will be added. Namely, here, we necessarily have to mention the latest negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, especially the most recent trilateral ones. For now, there isn't much more information about their future. New ones were supposed to take place, but in the end, it seems they were left somewhat up in the air. But above all, as a result of these statements, there have been prisoner exchanges on one hand and body exchanges on the other. The balance of power is overwhelmingly unequal on one side. The Russian Federation handed over to Ukraine about 15,500 dead soldiers who fell during the special military operation. On the Ukrainian side. While in exchange, it received about 429 bodies of Russian soldiers. The ratio is approximately 36-1, which are absolutely overwhelming numbers. And these are numbers that will eventually affect what the Ukrainian population will end up being, and who are taking to the streets more and more to demand that nothing happens to their male population because, in addition, as a result of these latest attacks by the Russian Federation in Ukraine, tents have been set up to shelter people, to offer them a bit of warmth, a bit of electricity, a place to charge their phones. And it turns out that in these tents, there are also people from the Ukrainian mobilization service who take men and drag them from a supposedly safe place directly to the front. And while the ratio of 36-1 can't give us the absolute correlation of forces on the battlefield, it does indicate several things to us here. The return of bodies is often, and in fact, almost always, initiated by the side that has accumulated the most of them. And above all, it's usually done by them. The controlled territory, meaning I have the territory where I need to take care of these bodies, especially if there are so many. Therefore, a very important conclusion can be reached, considering the number of bodies of soldiers from the armed forces of Ukraine that are handed over to Russia. The practice of closing the front with infantry, that is, holding back the ranks of the Russian Federation with infantry, is being widely used by the Ukrainian side. And often, this withdrawal of Ukrainian forces happens in a completely chaotic way when there is simply no way to retreat anymore. And this is precisely why the Russian Federation accumulates so many bodies of the armed forces of Ukraine in its possession. They can't organize a proper and sufficient withdrawal. The evidence speaks for itself, and that's where we're seeing the results. Because of this, a large number of bodies of Ukrainian soldiers remain in the territory that comes under the control of the Russian Federation. And what if Russia returns the bodies to Ukraine in these numbers? It also means that a significant part of the military clashes end with Russian control being established over the disputed territories by military force. Even if they seem tactically controversial, or if they fight or engage in battles over villages that aren't very large. We must also not forget the search for and evacuation of the bodies of the Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield. It's a very dangerous process, and it can't be carried out easily without suppressing enemy activity. From this, we also conclude that the Ukrainian armed forces do not currently have this capability. And this adds to the masterstroke by the Russian Federation that we are discussing in this material. In particular, because all these people who are starting are protesting and taking to the streets over the energy situation and will eventually connect the dots. Energy situation with the situation on the battlefield. Because if we're already protesting, why not protest about everything together? And there, the Kyiv regime will end up facing a real problem in absolutely real terms. And I would even say in absolutely imminent terms.